Okay, hello everybody. Today we're here in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 in the Cessna 152. We have a 54 nautical mile flight from Whiskey Bravo Whiskey, Wilkes-Barre, Wyoming Valley, to Sierra Echo Golf, Penn Valley, Selinsgrove. We'll be flying VFR with live weather and real time, and today we're going to take a little bit of extra time during our flight brief and look at what a real weather brief looks like for a cross-country flight like this. It should be an awesome flight, so let's hop into the pilot seat and get started. So we're sitting here with Monica, our co-pilot as always, parked here by the pumps at Whiskey Bravo Whiskey, which is my real-life home field. So we'll start by getting the doors closed. There we go. Now we'll head down here and check that all of our switches are off, our parking brake is set. Our throttle is to idle, mixture to idle cutoff, carb heat is in. Our trim, we'll nudge up here and set it to take off. Head down here to the fuel selector and rotate that on. Open up the window. Check that the prop area is clear. We'll head down here, get the battery and the alternator on, check the fuel quantity left and right, and we've got full fuel tanks, which looks good. So next we will bring the mixture into rich, bring in the throttle, 1/8 of an inch, prime it, 1, 2 strokes, 3 strokes of the primer. Call clear prop. Check that the prop area is clear one more time, put our feet on the brakes, keys in the ignition, and crank it over. We got a good start. Oil pressure is in the green. Head up here and adjust our throttle until we get to 1,000 RPMs. That looks good. Down to the mixture, and we'll lean this for ground operations. Alright, we get our transponder to standby. COM1, COM2, NAV1, NAV2 are all turned on. They've already got the frequencies dialed in of 1228, which is CTAF, 12095, Wilkes-Barre approach, 1215, guard, and 13575, which is Wilkes-Barre ATIS. We'll adjust the altimeter here, so we're reading field elevation, which is 544 feet for Whiskey Bravo Whiskey. Look at the window here on the left-hand side, we can get the metric reading and dial that into the autopilot. So that was a 1013, and it's already set up, so that looks good. We're going to be cruising at 4,500, so we'll dial that into the autopilot now. We've got a super easy direct flight path, which is essentially flying runway heading of 250, so we'll head down to our heading bug and dial in our initial heading of 250. There we go, that all looks good. We've got about a 45-minute trip. You can see on the clock that it's 6:10 p.m. Sunset's a little bit after 7, so we should arrive just before sunset at Selinsgrove. Next, open up ForeFlight and take you through the flight brief. So you can see we're departing from Whiskey Bravo Whiskey, which is an untowered field under the Tersa of Wilkes-Barre Scranton International. So we can pick up flight following through the Tersa's radar services. We're going to fly runway heading of 250, looking for our first waypoint, which is Glen Lyon, right along the Susquehanna River. Our next ground reference will be the Berwick Power Plant, which will have big steam plumes coming out of it that you can see all the way from Whiskey Bravo Whiskey. Then Berwick itself is our second waypoint. Our third waypoint is Bloomsburg N13, which is also our alternate airport. Next is Danville at our fourth waypoint. Sunbury will be a ground reference that will let us know that we are about at top of descent to begin our descent to get the pattern altitude for Penn Valley. Next, we'll click on the flight tab and go to the navlog and briefing screen. Now, in real life, this is where you could file a flight plan, so don't press that button because you would actually file a flight plan. Next is the briefing, and this will fetch a weather briefing. This is one of many ways to get a weather briefing for a cross-country flight. It starts with NOTAMs for closed or unsafe runways. Whiskey Bravo Whiskey does have a closed grass strip that's always closed in the wintertime, so there's a NOTAM for that. Next are icing air mets. We do have one active. It's for altitudes of 5,000 feet to 9,000 feet. That is higher than we'll be flying, but it is something to be aware of for this trip. Next are turbulence low and high air mets. So when we click on that, we'll see that there's an inactive air met for turbulence low, so not active for our time frame. There is an active air met for turbulence high, but this is like jetliner altitudes, and you see that these are from altitudes of 24,000 to 34,000. Next is the surface analysis chart. This looks a lot like what you see the weathermen present to you each night on the news. So if we scroll over to Pennsylvania, we can see that there's a warm front that's just leaving us and a cold front that's coming in. So we had some beautiful, awesome spring-like weather, and now it's getting cold and we've got some crummy weather right on the tail of it that's going to hit us on the weekend. Next are METAR, so this is the current weather everywhere along your flight, so you could scroll through all of these airports and see what the winds and the temperature is. Next are PIREPs, and there's a ton of them here, so if you start tapping on PIREPs, it'll show you where it was reported from, and as you read all of these, they're really matching up with what you just saw. So you have a lot of high altitude turbulence PIREPs from A320s, right? It's jetliners flying at flight levels that are, 31,000 feet. So something to be aware of, but we don't have any that pertain to the altitudes we're going to be flying at for this trip. Next is cloud coverage, and this is a pretty cool map. So we'll click on the northeast because we're here in Pennsylvania, zoom in, and you can see OVC, which is overcast, SCT, scattered, cirrus clouds, SKC, which is skies clear, and the numbers are altitudes. So broken 14,000, tops 29,000, overcast 16,000. So very high altitude clouds aren't going to be a problem for our VFR flight today. Next is the surface forecast, and it's a little hard to read if you're not familiar with the symbols. For instance, these are lightning bolts all the way west of Pennsylvania. That's that bad weather that's coming our way. But in Pennsylvania itself, those green dots are rain, and those black lines with little things sticking off of them are wind vectors, and each of those little things sticking off is a barb. So half a barb is 5 knots, a long barb is 10 knots, and you just count them up like tick marks. So if you had 5 long barbs, it would be 50 knots. Next are the TAFs. The TAFs are forecasts as well, so you can see the TAFs for the different times by the airports that we'll be traveling through. This is the wind chart. So the wind chart, if we scroll in on it, is showing you the direction of the wind. So half a barb is 5 knots, full barb is 10, so you see a full and a half, so that's 15 knots at the flight level we're flying. And the number is the temperature, so that's 10 degrees Celsius because it's got a plus sign in front of it. This one's kind of a funky chart. This is the vertical cross-section chart. It's showing you the direction of the wind relative to how your plane is traveling along its trip from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen as we travel across from it. There's the latitude, longitude coordinates at the bottom that show you where you are at the trip and the predicted altitudes we're going to be at. So it's giving you an idea if you have a tailwind, a headwind, or if you've got a crosswind that's pushing against you. The winds aloft table also gives you that information. It'll give you the actual wind at different altitudes. Next up are departure NOTAMs, and you can see a whole bunch of NOTAMs calling out towers that maybe are unserviceable for their lights, or maybe the lights aren't working on them. Destination NOTAMs, same deal. You might have some for the airport itself, in particular for IFR approaches. Next are en route NOTAMs, and that will have everything between point A and point B, and a lot of these are VORs, and a lot of those might say they're simply not serviceable, but some might say that certain radials are unusable. So you have to go through all of these, especially if you're using VOR navigation. En route special use airspace, there is restricted airspace near where we're flying, so that calls that out. You've got en route runway tower apron NOTAM, so these are NOTAMs specifically for the airports that we are passing over. Other NOTAMs, so many NOTAMs. If you print this out, and I did this for one of my first flights, I got a full weather briefing from 1-800-WX brief and printed it. It was like 120 pages. There's an FAA regulation, CFR 91-103, that says that the pilot in command must be familiar with all available information prior to commencing their flight, and this, in part, is what they're talking about. So you are expected to read all of that and understand what you are reading and be aware of all the hazards along your flight path. So that was the brief. We have finished our run-up here at the hold short lines. We're actually on runway 927, which is the closed runway, but we're not on the closed grass part of it here. There's a paved area, and we do this for real at Whiskey Bravo Whiskey. Use it as a hold short area to stay clear of the runway. So we're going to back taxi on 25, turn around in the bubble here at the end of 25, and then do our departure. So yesterday I enjoyed that awesome warm front that you saw in the flight brief there. That warm front was 70 degrees So 70 degrees in March in Northeast Pennsylvania is incredible, and I enjoyed it by flying. So 5 p.m. flight, working on some pattern work, doing all my variations of landings with my CFI. And I will say that if you follow the channel, you know I took a couple months off from flying because I had a minor medical issue, which wasn't a big deal. It's been resolved, and I've just started flying again. But they always tell you that, you know, flying is a perishable skill. If you don't do it for a while, you lose those skills. And this was that first test of it for me. And it was really exactly what, you know, you'd been told. There's this question that you get as a private pilot on the oral exam, which is the difference between being proficient versus being current. And current is having the legal minimums to fly, whereas proficient is actually being good at it. And this was like the perfect example of it. It was coming back, sitting down, and doing some landings, and suddenly landing like a pre-solo student. It's like, oh my gosh, how did my brain fall out? So, you know, after a bunch of times going around in circles in the pattern, it started to come back to me. But I definitely learned something from that experience. And I was glad I learned that with the CFI, and that I didn't have that experience solo, you know, after I'd already gotten my license and was hopping back in the plane after 3 months off. All right, we've got the Susquehanna River off to our left here, which will be following for the entire flight. This is the point where we'd switch over to Wilkes-Barre approach and ask for flight following. They'd give us a squawk code, and then we'd have flight services for the duration of the flight. At the tail end of the flight, they'd hand us off to Harrisburg approach for the last 15 miles or so until we got to Selinsgrove. So we are on track for our flight now. Let's sit back and enjoy that awesome flight simulator scenery. Now that we're clear of the runway, we can get our strobes off and our transponder to standby, and I noticed that my landing light wasn't working as we were coming in on short final, and neither is my taxi light. So let's try toggling those off and back on again, and still not working. So let's troubleshoot it. We'll head over here and we'll check all of our circuit breakers. There's the landing light there, and it's popped. Push that in. Let's see if that brought it back to life. So we'll head up here and have a look. There it is. I love the JP Logistics mod. I love that it actually has failures and circuit breakers that get tripped. So now we'll taxi over here at Penn Valley and find a nice parking space. I've slowly been building up this airport. I've added night lighting to it, so this looks different than what you'll get in the default. At some point, I'll put some effort into it and polish it up and release it on flightsim.to so that others can enjoy it. So we've got everything shut down. Monica thought it was a good flight, which is good. So I hope you enjoyed realistic general aviation content like this and the little bit of the deep dive that we did for a flight brief. It's not something you usually get to see for flight simming, but it's something that you do all the time for real life flights. And I think it's really cool to see all of the weather items that you look at when you are planning even a short cross country like this of 54 nautical miles to Selinsgrove. So if you do enjoy content like this, be sure to click that like button, leave me a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, as always, for flying along with me, and stay tuned for further flight adventures.